This is the Atari Days podcast.
And there's merchandise all over the place. I can't even walk in here. I'm stepping on the merchandise. And I said, Sandy, what's going on here? He says, Guy, the advertisement was a success. I need you here full time.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-Bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Guy Ferrante worked for S&S Wholesalers, a Miami, Florida-based computer mail-order company, where he was in charge of creating magazine advertisements and managing the warehouse. He also ran Star BBS, a bulletin board system based in South Florida, for 11 years. This interview took place on August 25, 2017.
It started with the 2600. When the 2600 came out, I was completely blown away by it and ran out and bought one. And that was my first contact with the computer. And I got out of art school in 1979. I started to freelance. You know, that landed me all kinds of jobs. But what got me into computers was I got a job for an advertisement for a computer mail order house. And it was right here, you know, on Miami Beach. I live on Miami Beach. And I knew the property owners, and I ran into him one day, and he said, well, there's this guy up there, and he wants to do something with mail order computer parts. And I had no concept of mail order. So I went in there, I talked to him. He didn't have a lot of merchandise. He had some, but he had a lot of money. And we were talking, and he wanted to run an advertisement in the computer magazines. Mm-hmm. So I contacted Antic, and I contacted Analog and Compute and the Commodore magazines out there, and I got their rate card. And then I approached him, and I told him more or less what we could do to get started. It was a small strip ad, and you know, we did it. I got all the information. We sent the camera-ready art into, I think it was Antic or Analog. I'm not quite sure which one. And, you know, I got paid. They actually wanted me to be a partner, but I really didn't know anything about mail order, so I stayed out of that. And I just, you know, took a salary for my work at that time.
So what was the name of this mail order company?
S&S Wholesalers.
Okay.
And, if you go through Antic in the later years, I think from 84 up, somewhere in there. So I didn't see him for a couple of months, and I was, you know, off doing jobs for TV and newspaper and whatever. And I run into him one day, and I go in there, and there's merchandise all over the place. I can't even walk in here. I'm stepping on the merchandise. And his name was Sandy. There was two owners. And I said, Sandy, what's going on here? He says, Guy, the advertisement was a success. I need you here full time. So I had a new job. My duties was to do magazine ads for all the computer publications out there, and as a warehouse manager. And it was just an incredible experience. And that's how I'm involved with the Atari 8-bit computer.
Wow.
What happened then was, you know, it was just, I was overwhelmed with work. And the Atari was doing very well back then. And I'm talking 1980, let me see, 84, 85. And it was just fantastic. We had millions of dollars worth of Atari, Commodore, Apple, and we had some PC stuff. But the PC stuff was very expensive, and we had a room full of operators. And these girls would take the orders. You know, people would call in. They'd read Commodore and Atari magazines, and they would call in, place these orders. So the orders came up to me, and I had like a whole crew of people, and we would pack these boxes and get ready for the UPS trucks to come. And sometimes they had to come with 2 or 3 of them. And they were doing large amounts of sales, and most of it was Atari 8-bit stuff.
Wow.
And I know when I looked around and I read all these reviews that the Atari 8-bit was not doing that well, I'd say 75% of all our sales was Atari 8-bit.
Wow.
It started off with just like a one-page ad, full page, and then we went to a double page. And I produced every month. I produced a new one because the prices would change. And we did it for. I did it for antique, analog. Not much in analog. I think most of it was in antique, and then we did Commodore and Compute. I remember now, Compute. It was just a lot of work, and I was like, oh gosh! But I enjoyed working. And I became, I knew nothing about computers. I had 2600 at home, but I knew nothing about computers. And that's how I got involved in computers. And actually, that changed my life, too.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So what was challenging about creating these ads? I assume there's new products to deal with, some of which needed to be featured. I assume there was price changes all the time. So tell me about that.
Yeah, we were getting merchandise from Electronic Arts, and we were getting it from I think Best Electronics. If he was in business, we were getting stuff from him, and B&C, a lot of stuff from the auctions that Atari was having in California. Plus, we were at that time, Atari wasn't doing really great in the retail market, and Federated Stores, when they discontinued their 8-bit line. We just bought tractor trailer loads of that stuff.
Wow. Wild. So how long did this go on?
It went on. I worked for S&S Wholesalers for a couple of years, and things got a little chaotic in the computer world. There were some problems with the buyers of the company. We took on the Amiga when the Amiga came out, and I remember doing ads for the Amiga, and a lot of orders came in. We were going to carry the Amiga, and a lot of orders came in, pre-orders, and the money was stacking up in sales, and right at the last minute, Commodore had to change their heart, and they wanted the sellers out there to pay a license to sell the Amiga. And they wanted a lot of money, and so when things got crazy like that, another warehouse was opening up over here on Miami Beach, which was a Sony distributors for Dade County. They offered me a job, and I took it, and I'm glad I did because there was a lot of problems. The company that I worked for took a lot of orders for the Amiga, and they had all this money, and then Commodore switched the deals, and it, there was chaos there. And so I left and I started to work for Sony.
Cool. I finally found an S&S wholesaler ad in some random antique magazine. S&S Wholesales, wholesale to the public, buy below dealer cost at 226 Lincoln Road, Miami Beach, Florida. Very nice.
Yes. And I did those advertisements. I did a lot of different duties there. I was a warehouse manager. I packed the orders and made sure everything was correct because, back then people just didn't know what computer parts were, and I guess I was good at it. And so I managed the warehouse and I did the advertisements. I have a 2-year degree in commercial art and advertising, and so they needed me really bad.
Very cool. So did you use Atari computers on your own at home, or was this strictly a work thing?
No, it was strictly at work. And what I did was I approached one. I had a Atari 400 at home with 16K of RAM and a 2600 and a bunch of cartridges, a tape deck, and that was about it. But I wanted to buy one of those XLs, the 800 XL, and I talked to the one of the owners. I go, how much would it be for an 800 and a 1050 drive? And he says, God, just take it. It's a gift.
Nice.
So I took the computer home. I was really happy. You know, I'm supporting 3 kids and a wife, and so money was a little tight, and it was, I just couldn't justify spending that kind of money on myself. I would have felt a little guilty. So I take the computer home, and I just get involved in computers, and then when I left and I started to work for Sony, these people knew the Tremels, and they were always talking about the Tremels. They didn't carry Atari. We carried Sony and Commodore and Amstrad. That's right, Amstrad. And I was there for a while, and I did their advertisements in the newspaper and stuff. And then I became sort of ill, and I had to stay home. I couldn't work anymore. And, I started to call, I got a modem. I started to call local BBSs here in South Florida, and there were lots of them. But as the other computers became more popular, the Atari boards were closing up down here. And it got so bad that there were no boards out here. And that's when I made a decision, I'm going to put up a BBS. I'm going to support the Atari 8-bit people down here. So for about 8 months, it took me about 8 months to get a BBS up over here. And I started running the BBCS from Antic. And, a lot of people say, well, that BBS doesn't run. It does run. And I ran it for a year. And when I put it up online, it was 300 baud. And I got a few callers and really nice, people, because the Atari people had nowhere to call out here. And, long distance was very expensive in the 80s. And so people were looking for a local support board. And for 8 months, there was nothing. I put something up. It was very small, but I started to have, some traffic. And so I ran the BBCS for about 8 months. And then I moved over to BBS Express, the free version. And that was just a fantastic board. It never crashes. It's just a wonderful board. And I ran that for about a year.
What was the name of your board?
I wanted some. It's called Star BBS. I couldn't think of a name. I was living in Star Apartments at the time, and I was trying to think of names for a BBS. I couldn't think of anything, so I said, you know what? I'll just call it Star BBS.
Sure.
So the first board was run on the BBCS, and then I called it Star BBS 2. Was run with the free version of the BBS Express. And then I was calling out, I ran into the Pro Stops that were out there. And I think I called the Closer to Home board. And I went into chat mode with the system operator there, Tom Hunt, which is a wonderful person. And, he was telling me about this Express board and what it could do, and he was all enthusiastic about it. And so I placed an order with Bob Claus. He owned the rights to Orion Microsystems. And I placed an order for the BBS program. And then I ordered a whole bunch of hardware. I ordered the black box, multiplexers, and I had a multi-line system. And it just kept growing and growing and growing. It got very big. And at one point, it was the biggest Atari BBS in the entire country.
Wow.
I had over 500 megabytes of storage. And it was just wonderful.
Cool. How long did it run?
I ran the BBS for 11 years, from 88 to 99.
Awesome.
Now, the BBS Express Professional is a very powerful BBS program. Probably the most it is the most powerful BBS program for the Atari. It could actually compete with the PC boards. Wildcat was a great BBS board for the IBM, and it equaled the same thing in power. Actually, we had a lot more features than they did. And so I was networked with the Express network, and then there was a really bad time when there was almost no support at all.
Mm-hmm.
Atari dropped support for the chipset, for the 8-bit chipsets, and you couldn't find software nowhere. And so I started doing mail trades with Europe. There's a couple of guys out there that they were looking for software, and we were looking for software, and I did mail trades for a while. And so I was bringing in software for the local Atari people or anybody that called the BBS. I ran the BBS. There was no charge, and there was no file ratio, so people could log in and get the files that they needed to enjoy their computer.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Did you have any worries about getting in trouble for piracy?
Oh yeah, and I had a couple of rules. Being that it's a private-owned board, not a public board. A lot of people think that the BBSs were like public boards. That there would be no piracy and no adult content, because I had a lot of young people calling the board and downloading files and uploading files, and I didn't want profanity in the message bases, and I left a little disclaimer there, and everybody followed the rules. Piracy at that time was a concern, but not that much of a concern. Later on, that changed because there was no support for the Atari at all. And the BBS, at the last couple of years, went into a preservation type of situation where we were really concerned of Atari software disappearing forever.
Well, it didn't disappear forever. There's still people archiving it and putting on the web and finding software that's never been digitized before, and so it hasn't gone away.
Well, that's great. Now, like in the late '80s, you didn't want to be labeled a pirate board, especially on the Pro network.
Mm-hmm.
And so I made sure that if that none of that was up on the board. But I moved from South Florida to Central Florida in 95, 96. So I ran the BBS up in Mid Florida, and there's a Atari group out there, the Mid Florida Atari group, and I was thrilled about that group. There was a lot of people there. And it was very political structure there. And, when I went up there, it was just sort of strange. Now, down here in South Florida, we had weekly meetings. And we had like a think tank. We were always trying to better the Atari, upgrade our computers, try to squeeze all the juice out of these 8-bits. And there's still a lot there. The Atari 8-bit is still a very powerful machine. Mm-hmm. And a lot could be done with it. And we did a lot with it, but there could be a lot more done with it. Now, some of the features I had on the board was we offered things that the PC board did. For example, we had ASCII, we had ATASCII, mm-hmm. BT100, BT5200. We had RIP, and we had ANSI. The RIP translation was done third party, and that gave a GUI to the Amiga people. They would call the board, and they would get a desktop, and they would control the BBS with their mouse with pull-down windows. It looked exactly like an Amiga desktop.
Nifty. Very cool.
And a genius programmer out there, I'm not going to mention his name, but when he hears the podcast, he'll know that I'm talking about him. He also did a lot of stuff for the Atari 8-bit. And I guess he had an Amiga at one time, and we used RipTerm to make all the menus and stuff. And it was just great because when even the PC people, when they called the board, they got completely colored ANSI on the screen.
Sure, yeah.
The beauty of the 8-bit was that the modem, you could do a raw dump to the modem, even though it doesn't echo on our screen. But if you dump it to the modem, it goes right on their screen in a perfect format.
Nice. Yeah, it was always cool when a board would look right on your system, whether it was ASCII or ANSI or whatever. Nice. Did you have problems with? I mean, did people get along? Did you have problems with personalities creating problems?
That's a really good question. Now, when I joined there's local problems, and then there's network problems. The problems that a sysop will face is that if there's other boards in your area, and it doesn't matter if they support the same computer or not, they see that you're getting more phone calls, more traffic, then they try to compete for the callers, and it could get really ugly.
Huh.
And that was a local situation. Now on the network, which when I got on the network, I thought everything was one big happy family, and it wasn't like that exactly. I stepped on a landline and it blew up, and I never stepped on another one. So I just stayed out of any political. It's very political situations out there. There's a conflict of egos. So I just completely stayed out, didn't take sides, because that's what was going on. People were taking sides, and it was getting ugly. And so I didn't get involved in any of that. I just stayed out of it. The only thing I did with the network, besides support it and bought like new upgrades from the author, Orion Microsystems. I think it was owned by Bob Claus at that point. And I just, stayed out of it, didn't get involved, and everything was fine.
All right, so then what happened? You're humming along, you're running the BBS, and what changed?
Well, I ran the BBS until 1999. I was getting ready for I was ready for the Y2K bug, and but the internet was becoming so popular, and the phone calls for the board were just dropping off. That it came to the point where I just took the board offline, and I haven't put the board back up. Mm-hmm. But I have a small group of people here in South Florida, and we're planning on something for the future. And I could give you a little hint about what we're going to do. Well, we're going to have a BBS here in South Florida, and it's going to be strictly Atari, ASCII graphics, and it's going to be a data center, so that if people want to relive and get that nostalgic feeling of how it was back then, they could call. It's going to be through the phone. We're not going to put it on the internet because finding an Atari user that has his 8-bit hooked up to the internet is probably not a good idea. A simple configuration would be an Atari 8-bit with a modem. And so we're going to bring back the BBS days. And it's something that we want to do here, because I have a massive amount of Atari software from the old days that's not even on the internet. And so we want to have a database where we could access our software from the computer, instead of going through boxes and boxes and boxes of floppies. I have over 1,000 floppy disks with all kinds of software from the 80s.
Yeah, awesome.
So that's the future plans.
Excellent.
There's a couple of us still left down here.
So it sounds like you still use your Atari?
No, I don't have one hooked up right now, and I haven't had one hooked up for about 3 years. I'm looking for a house, and everything's all packed up.
Yeah.
And I plan on moving into a house next year, and one room will be dedicated to all the computers. I'm a system builder, and I built high-quality gaming PC rigs and cryptocurrency miners. And so that's what I've been doing for the last, probably the last 20 years.
Wow. So with cryptocurrency mining, is it like gold mining where the real money is to be made selling the tools, or is the money to be made doing the mining?
Okay, the tools are, well, when the cryptos became popular in 2009, they almost had no value to them. They were under a penny, and you couldn't buy them here in the United States because there was no exchange. So in order to get them, you had to mine them, and you needed powerful equipment. At that point was GPU cards, and a lot of them. And so a person that wanted to start mining then, could make a $2,000 investment and have faith in what cryptocurrency is. And the rewards were just off the charts. People became millionaires.
Yeah. And today?
And today, mining, you can still mine, but you can't mine Bitcoin. You could mine, there's more than 1,000 cryptocurrencies out there. A lot of them will never go anywhere, but some have legs. And if you could get in and mine, something that's going to move up, and I know nobody's got a crystal ball, it could be really, really good. Now, Bitcoin moved from the GPUs to ASIC miners. So when I was mining Bitcoin, I had ASIC miners, and I had a farm. And it was sort of like the BBS. You had massive amounts of computers. That's what I had. With StarNet was huge. In the last couple of years, it was just a lot of Atari computers all hooked up in the network with the Bob Huff multiplexer and black box and 2 MIOs and a lot of hardware. But the crypto mining, you could do Ethereum now, and there's some others that are very profitable.
All right, so what haven't we talked about the Atari Days that we should have? We talked about the wholesaling. We talked about the BBS. Do you have your fingers in any other Atari projects? Me
and a couple of people here, have plans on doing something late next year, with the Atari 8-bit. The 8-bit days were great. We were all in a collectiveness. The programmers out there were great, and if it wasn't for the BBS has got us to where we are now, and it was a support board. People, we offered a lot of things. We offered, email, we offered file mail and network. We were all networked, and we were actually pulling the networks from Europe over, and so that brought us to where we are right now. And a lot of people, when when they get an Atari and they just can't even imagine the fun that they missed out on, because it was just great. Did you call the BBSs back then, Kevin?
I did. I was in California, and I called what I could that was local to me. But yeah.
Oh yeah, local. And that was a thing with long distance was very expensive back then.
Yeah. Yes,
but I called California. Atari had a BBS out there. I think it was a 4 to 6 line board, and I called there time to time to see how things were going on with Atari.
All right, so if you could send a message to the Atari 8-bit community that still exists, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to, if they want to relive some of the olden days from the past, that there'll be something in the future for them if they want to experience that. It was a really a great time, because we kept the Atari community together. Things were not good from 86 on up with Atari. They moved towards the ST, and then they went to the Falcon, and then Atari doesn't exist like that anymore. And so they would be able to a place for their computer, because every computer that you have could call the internet. That's not a big deal. But what about your Atari computer? It can't call anywhere. There may be some boards around the country. I don't know. I know there's a couple over in Europe.
There's a few around, and you can. There's ways to get them online, especially over the internet. But you don't even have to have a landline, which who has that anymore? So there's some new hardware and software that makes it not too hard to get your Atari online.
Oh, is it? Well, then, okay, then that's great. I'll have to look into that. I did some research, but the research is not conclusive.
Sure.
So we haven't, made. It's not in stone yet. But we do plan on having, a dial-up.
That's great. Yeah, do it old school. Nothing wrong with that. But in particular, there's one little modem gadget that will plug into your 850 interface, and it gets the computer, the Atari or whatever, thinks it's a modem, and it accepts AT commands, his command set, but it's interfacing to Wi-Fi. So you can type ATDT and an IP address, and it'll just dial out, and the computer thinks it's on the phone, and but it's really calling an IP address. So it's pretty darn cool.
Okay, that's great. Wi-Fi with an 8-bit, that's great.
Yeah. But what you're doing is cool too. I mean, just having a old school dial-up, that's really cool for people who still have landlines.
Right, we're going to have multiple landlines. Now we have the equipment. We have lots of equipment. The equipment, we got that already. That's not a problem. We have multiplexers, and we got black boxes, we got MIOs, and we got about maybe 20, 25 8-bit computers. We have that many, and most of them are upgraded, over the years when we had the user groups. Now, when people called the board, I organized a little group here, and it was non-political. Everybody came to my apartment, and we once a week. It wasn't once a month like the Mid-Florida user group, which I was vice president of that group over there. And we just had a good time. There was no political structure. Everybody relaxed, and we demoed a lot of hardware, and we got people interested in Atari, and we did a lot of cool things. And I remember once when we demoed the Atari ATR 8000, I think it is,
yeah.
The ATR 8000. And we ran MS-DOS 3.2 on an Atari 8-bit. And people were just blown away. I mean, how can you run MS-DOS on an Atari 8-bit? Yeah, we did it with the ATR 8000 with a co-power board and a couple of 8-inch floppy disk, and it was just great. And everybody was blown away, including myself.
Fun. Neat.
And then, we'd order pizza, and you would be surprised at people that came. We've had accountants there, and we had policemen there, and it was just great back then. And but then when I moved to Central Florida, and there was a group who were like real political. They had officers, accountants, and a treasurer, and a librarian for the 8-bit, and a librarian for the ST. And so, I walked into that, and I was like, oh, okay, I'll just sit here and be quiet.
I think I have what I need. Thank you very much.
Okay, Kevin, the pleasure was mine, and I'm so glad you called me, and I'm so glad that people will read, hear them on the internet, and they may be expired, or just out of curiosity, they'll get some background information about the advertisements on Antic, anyways. Okay, thanks a lot, Kevin.
All right, bye, guys.
Okay, bye now.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, there are 2 ways you can help. You can help fund these interviews directly by contributing to my Patreon. A small monthly contribution will help offset the expenses of making these oral history interviews. Contribute at patreon.com/savitz. Or make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.